Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Haley Mitchell Haugen. I am the founder and director of the nonprofit arts organization Sheila-Na-Gig Inc. and the editor of the poetry journal Sheila-Na-Gig Online and the small press Sheila-Na-Gig Editions. I invite you to check us out at www.sheila-na-gigblog.com. It's my absolute honor to provide tonight's platform for Spoken and Heard. And without further ado, I am pleased to briefly introduce our host. Kari Gunter-Seymour is the Poet Laureate of Ohio and the author of 3 award-winning collections of poetry, including her latest, Dirt Songs, from Eastover Press in 2024, and A Place So Deep Inside America It Can't Be Seen from Sheila-Na-Gig Editions, winner of the 2020 Ohio Poet of the Year. She's the executive director of Women of Appalachia Project and editor of its anthology series, Women Speak. Her work has been featured in the American Book Review, Poem a Day, World Literature, the New York Times, and many other venues. Welcome, Kari. It's just wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Haley. I'm so happy to be here. It's just wonderful to have you hosting us this year. And I'm really grateful for that, as is everybody that we're going to feature. I want to be sure to welcome our audience, those of us here tonight, and also those of you who will stream us later on Facebook and on Sheila-Na-Gig's YouTube page. So Sheila-Na-Gig is a wonderful publishing company, and a small press, and she does have an online journal, and she's humble, so she didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but I do hope you all will check out Sheila-Na-Gig. It's a wonderful place, home for your individual poems, and also I think it's every 2 years now, Sheila-Na-Gig Editions will be doing a call for both chapbooks and full-length books. So tonight we'll enjoy both poetry and nonfiction provided by the excellent DORSÍA SMITH SILVA and Appalachia's own Charles Dodd White. It's such a pleasure to bring voices such of these to all of you, my friends. So there'll be a short Q&A later for those of you with us tonight. Please jot down your questions and be ready to enter them in the chat at the end of the readings. And between Haley and I, we'll sort those out and make sure that we ask our featured readers to answer some of those questions. So let's begin. DORSÍA SMITH Silva is the author of In Inheritance of Drowning from Kari, 2024. She is the poetry editor of The Hopper and professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico. She has received scholarships and fellowships from Breadloaf and the Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing. Her recent work has been published in LitHub, Electric Lit, and the Los Angeles Review, the Cimarron Review, Beloit Poetry Journal, and is forthcoming in the Eco Poetry Anthology, Volume 2, and elsewhere. Her interview by Poets.org for the Enjambment series was featured in November of 2024. She has a PhD in Caribbean literature and posts at D.S. Smith Silva. So we hadn't actually met before tonight, other than through social media, and that often happens for folks that I'm hosting here on Spoken and Heard, and I always love it when I'm able to bring in someone, a brand new voice, and coming all the way to us from Puerto Rico. But I did extract this from a review written by Cassandra Lewis for Terrain Journal. And she says, building on colonial and generational trauma, the action and settings in Silva's poems bear witness to present-day racial injustices. Fear encompasses the past, present, and the threat of future hurricanes. This spiral of stunning poetry is the poet's call to action. By examining history and its haunting presence, and by observing the connections to the natural world, one might ask, how can we stop the drowning? So as we embrace ourselves for the next hurricane while millions of people are still recovering from the last. I wonder, what will it take for social, racial, and climate justice to become the top priority? Maybe poetry, such as Silva's, will be the beacon we have been waiting for. You can purchase Inheritance of Drowning at bookshop.org or from the CavinCaryPress.org. And I'm so excited to welcome DORSÍA SMITH SILVA.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Kari. That was wonderful. And thank you for having me, Kari and Haley. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward also to the wonderful reading that Charles is going to do later. Thank you all so much for having me again. And as you mentioned, my book is called An Inheritance of Drowning, and it focuses on the racial, social, and political injustices that are happening right now. It also looks at Hurricane Maria and how Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. And even though that hurricane occurred in 2017, Puerto Rico is still feeling the effects of that hurricane. So when we think about that, we can think about how these natural disasters have not just affected the Caribbean, but as we saw with Hurricane Helene, we're seeing how these natural disasters, think of the fires as well in the Palisades, are really decimating communities, and how it is essential we think about climate change, that we think about global warming. So the first poem I'm going to read, it's the very first poem in the book. The title is called What the Poet is Supposed to Write About a Hurricane. And just to give you just a little backstory, I wrote this poem because when Hurricane Maria was coming, when you see the Doppler radar map, you have all these really bright, vivid colors, sort of like what you see with the umbrellas in my screen here, the background. And to the unknown eye, you really think, well, these colors are vibrant and they're beautiful, but it really means that the hurricane is spreading and it's getting larger and is really dangerous. But if you really didn't know that, you would think perhaps it was like a painting, like a big abstract painting. So that got me thinking of what if a hurricane was just another moment of time instead of something so devastating, something so destructive. So that's why the poem is called What the Poet is Supposed to Write About a Hurricane. What the poet is supposed to write about a hurricane should be skylights of horror, not skid rocks of beauty in walls of wind, affixed to the puzzle pieces of the vortex eye, spinning like a lost continent soul. How the lively whips should stun the mouths of gravity, hissing without hesitation, engulfing the stench of uprooted dirt and grass. The poet is supposed to decode the stanzas, shudder the name Maria into frail syllables, to wish a hurricane a fast and gritty death, not say its stubborn slow dances, held intoxicating possibilities and mysteries. The next poem I'm going to read is called My Grandmother's Photo. And when we think of hurricanes, natural disasters, we think of what we lose. Some people lose their homes, some people lose their vehicles, some people lose their furniture, other items. I'm thinking of those things that are personal mementos that we lose when natural disasters happen and that you cannot get back. That's the inspiration behind this poem, My Grandmother's Photo. My grandmother's photo. She smiles in black and white, cotton pleated dress with a thick belt, showing her newlywed 25-inch waist, a size 4, long before the folds of stretched skin from 3 children. Her ebony hair hangs in shiny cascading ringlets, held by a slip of red ribbon and crystal combs. Her hand is wrapped tightly around my grandfather's, new gold branding their fingers, paid for by the weight of dirt and hot dawn mornings. With just one day, the rain washes out my grandmother's body and makes her a false whisper upon inspection. Brown dots replace her smile, and her hands are swallowed by dark spirals and bubbles. The thin edges fall into wrinkled tatters, sprinkles of paper breaking faster from sheets of water. The wind pushes her, cracked and rearranged, beside an overturned car, like a new broken flower in the grave. And the next one I'll read is called The Bee. And this is based on what I experienced during Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria not only decimated homes, buildings, schools, neighborhoods, but it also took a lot of the landscape away. And so when you think of how the vegetation is gone after a hurricane, you wonder, well, what happens to the animals that feed upon that vegetation? And you also think of the insects that are also affected by the loss of that vegetation. So after Hurricane Maria, I saw this poor bee that was trying to pollinate my brassiere. And I kept thinking, you know, there's nothing there, you poor thing. It was confused. And if you're wondering why my brassiere was outside, it was because we had no electricity. So the clothes were hanging outside on the drying rack. And this poor bee was really trying to, you know, pollinate my brassiere. So I decided to write a poem about it because it was obvious to me that the poor bee was just suffering from so much disorientation. But it was also a time where you can think about how we were all disoriented in the sense of, when are we going to get electricity back? When are we going to have green back? When's the vegetation going to come back? So many questions that unfortunately we're still in that situation now with, when are things going to get back? I put this in quotes, normal. The bee. After Hurricane Maria, you spin in a daze, punch drunk from the fetid fumes of the generator, but you have made a decision to eat, live. You leap onto a dark tan bra that is wildly flapping on the clothesline, eager to gather something sweet and bring it to the surface. And yet there is nothing there but a bare circle of cotton. You wonder how the hurricane galloped away with the flowers, triggering a vanishing act. Well, where is the magician's wand to bring back the canopy of blossoms? It must be in the wind of loss, along with the why and because. There is no way to tell you about the aftermath, slow cruelty. It is a tale that claws cell by cell, leaving wings to litter this earth. The next poem I'll read is called the Q&A section. And this explains why so many people after Hurricane Maria were really forced to leave Puerto Rico, not so much because they lost their livelihood, but because of the fear that happens after a natural disaster. You're wondering, well, when is the next hurricane going to come? And then after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico suffered from a series of blackouts. So many people had anxiety, PTSD of the lack of electricity and all of the stress that then ensues. The Q&A section. If you ask me why I left Puerto Rico, I would tell you that it wasn't because Hurricane Maria left me with a bloated album of waiting for the blackouts to skip between the trees. It wasn't because the roofs unfurled and the doors retreated to hollows somewhere in the sky. It wasn't because of the shells of water inching like new constellations across an endless night. It was the full circle of fear, the kind that stays in my mouth like neon jawbreakers, refusing to surrender, tailor-made to dislocate words that I long to speak. I dread colliding against this familiar, when the memory gathers like burning hands around your throat. And the next poem leads right into what happens to so many people when they had to leave Puerto Rico. They were forced to assimilate to this kind of ideal American, I put that in quotes. And so then it becomes an issue of sometimes not speaking Spanish, speaking English, giving up certain Puerto Ricanisms to become more American. I put that in quotes because it's such a wide, broad definition. And this poem really hopes that there's a conversation about what being American means. Becoming American. We are first to cover our hearts with our hands, sing My Country 'Tis of Thee, and wear La Americana flag shorts. We swap Medalla for Budweiser, go to Shoney's and order the all-you-can-eat breakfast. No one cares if we waste food, as long as we leave a decent tip and speak quietly. Leave La Islas Conversaciones at the kitchen table. We are encouraged to buy the biggest trucks and waste gas, take over the road and parking spaces. People make way when they see us. What kind of horsepower do you get? They admire strength. We are told not to ask those back home to send us pique and cafe. We should tamper our tongues and get the mild options. We go to Starbucks and get wild concoctions like unicorn berry frappuccino. Everything tastes too sweet, but this, they say, is the American way. Sugar, sugar, more sugar. Our coworkers go ahead and call us JL and AE because they butcher our real names. Josefa Luis, Abeguito Efraín. Everyone goes by some initials anyway, they claim. Look at JFK and MLK. Juanito is Buddy. Everyone here gets a nickname too. We are forgetting the cuentos about the iguana thief. Now is blah, blah, blah about parking as wide as bedrooms. Rows and rows of different types of water in stores. Community meetings with 5 different types of cake and strawberry swirl ice cream. Everything is so sweet, but they give us plates and foil. It is the American way. Some signs say English only, no Spanish allowed. There is the look to keep our rolling R's to ourselves. Pronounce rice so that it doesn't sound like fries. Remember, it's soup or salad, not super salad. And delete the word focus from our vocabulary. It always sounds like fuck us. The waiter smiles when we leave a nice tip, because tipping is the American way. Please come again. Take some mints. Here are the toothpicks. Goodies on the way out. How nice. How American. The junk mail is bigger and brighter. The flyer from the neighborhood dentist pops orange in chili pepper font with promises to make teeth white, white, white. The flyer comes with a coupon, a special, something on sale. How can it be any more American than that? The next poem points to part of the migration crisis that we're having. And I wrote this poem even before all that's happening right now. I kind of, I don't want to say it was like a forecast, but I was very nervous about certain policies with migrants and immigrants. So this poem is called Archive of Green. I'm afraid to squint the green morning. Kingfishers spill into trees. Grass churns their interrupted wings. My vomit gropes green conceived gallstones. Doctors growl. No green money, no service. Officers grunt. No green card, no mercy. Deportation agents hiss, sit in the green chair. Their eyes upend jaded faces to riot. How green precedes guideposts to exile. And I have another poem, again, about the migration crisis. It's called Return. The river said, I'll protect you and give you shelter. So we migrants came. We traveled a long journey. The river carried us like familiar wind. Then we walked and dreamed of motionless water, dreamed of water that said, welcome, come, come, come. Then they arrived with hanging scowls, arrived on horses long-reined with whips, ran down our bodies, trampled our faces, maimed our voices, made us turn our backs to water, told us water will not protect you here. This water does not belong to you. Your tears belong to you. That water is yours. That water should be plenty. Our tears scramble across miles. They get caught in many rivers. And our bodies keep drowning. We die in so many ways. They say we have no papers, no roots to dayfall here as we are being sent back. We see the water below us on the plain. It tells us to return. Think of tendrils pushing through the muddy bottom. We can't look away. And now I'm going to move into a poem that is for women of color that go missing and do not get the national attention they deserve. It's one of my favorite poems. And as I mentioned, it's for all BIPOC women, especially since this is the month of the women. I like to think of it as Women's Month, not just Women's Day. So I like to highlight this poem. It's called Ghost Talker Poem. And even though I use Black girls, it really is for all the BIPOC women that go missing and do not get the national attention they deserve. Ghost Talker Poem. And for the Black girls that go missing from newspaper headlines and Spotlight 5 p.m. news, what happened to them? Kick the can over, see if the bones glint in the slips of sunshine. Press your ears against the grass, listen to what bleeds. My mother in her lovely tongue. Those girls are probably with friends hanging out in the basement, wearing cigarette pants. Cigarette pants were fashionable once. They will turn up like loose change sidelined under sofa cushions, overdue books sandwiched in sweaters, favorite hairpins gagged by vents. Don't fret. Fret is a funny word for a young child. Sounds like forget. Don't forget. I won't. About the missing Black girls, probably already dead in a ditch or a field somewhere. I'm not supposed to think about death. Passing away, kick the bucket 6 feet under, meeting our maker, which is what my teacher said. The class guinea pig had stopped moving. Mrs. Hayes poked its feet and then shoved it into a shoebox, said that we could bury it across from the tire swing in the back of the schoolyard. The dirt was ordinary, brown, hard. Eat your snacks, said my mother, Twinkies from 7-Eleven, maybe Wawa, nothing from Superfresh or Pathmark. White filling, creamy like white fungus, oozing like zit pus, besmirching golden cake. The news says nothing about Black girls that go missing, not even a speck in someone's unread newspaper. Silence is when we inherit ghosts. I see them taking victory laps every night. So in the spirit of Women March, Women's Celebration, I'm going to read another poem about my mother, and it's called My Mother Gets Her Birth Chart Read. My mother gets her birth chart read by a juju woman who tells her not to be perturbed by blank stars. Leo is ascending, which means good times rocketing faster than sunrise. Marathons of steady light surviving any droplets of rain. Venus is emerging at 29 degrees north node, which drives the Earth's one-arm push-ups in the front yard. No makeshift mornings or lonely larks. Plenty of long dahlias envy her teeming thrill as she dilates in front of the projector, seeking not more light, but her own spell. And now I have a poem for a daughter. I wrote this for my daughter, but I don't have a daughter, so it was like my imaginary daughter. But if you have a daughter, if you think of the mother-daughter connection, this poem would fit that. My daughter is the wolf of me is the title of the poem. My daughter is the wolf of me. Moon howls my four-legged desires into rivers of lupin flowers and alpha star. Hunts down fears nesting in hunter, sniff lumps of green to thirst Calibu, bloats on stars colostrum like extra moonlight, marvel at her wilderness unwhittled, which mirrors my own, same anthem combing through trees, same trots of desire, unbending to night's stubby clouds, rain whisks us to den, darkness circled into tree trunks. Slow down blood gets a season. We curve to a lick. And now I'm going to read, this is my attempt at a love poem. I normally don't write a lot of love poems, but I thought I'm going to try it. And this one was actually published in The Stand, and it also combines music. I'm a fan of the artist Prince. So I said, love poem and Prince, published in The Stand. How could it get any better? So this is called You Follow a Gift Guide According to Prince. The gifted pink cashmere coat huddles with the purple denim jackets in the hallway closet. But I detest pink ever since Lynn dared me to change stiff pink crayons up my nose. My mother dislodged them with tweezers and chuckled like song at the watering hole. At least you did not ruin the good crayons. Of course not. The Melissa and Doug packs were saved for fast driving fun at the doctor's office and giving the bathtub a full facelift. On cool rainy days in the mountains of Adjuntas, cashmere is too pretty and gentle to wear. Without a front door moment, the fibers badmouth clouds and recede like kneeling light. If you ask me, then I want the feel-good raspberry beret. I promise to wear it on occasions that are more than just pilgrimage to bad hair days. When the stars are low, I will fling it at the moon and watch it heartbeat back in colors that we have known all of our lives. And I'm going to end with a poem that brings us back to the environment. There's also the universal love that we have for the environment, and also the love that we have for each other as humans on this planet. It's called G is for Greenhood. So I'm going to end hopefully on a very positive note. G is for Greenhood, for spring sitting on my shoulders, then fastening to eye level, Chanteuse gladiolas spinning, bowing in the distance, scents of green greening until earth gets it right. Green that I can't keep to myself. Say, green belongs within reach, like an extract of sepal outside of the flower body. You wouldn't recognize me when I cradle green, for fear of it becoming worn in many places. Even when morning lurks upside down, green, not this green, never hurts. Ask the turacos giving off green among drizzled leaves. Ask the grasshoppers that throw themselves against grass because it glistens. Ask wet green in my blood that hasn't forgotten spare green across homeland, where your green overlaps with mine. Thank you so much.
DORSÍA, that was absolutely wonderful, as I knew it was going to be. And I just want to thank you so much for educating us. I think that we forget so much here. We're just so self-centered, many in this country, especially right now. And we conveniently forget about Maria. And a couple of the things that really stuck out to me is, first of all, you are so visual. Your observations were my observations because you are so good at wordsmithing. And I loved everyone here gets a nickname too, reminding us that you are us. And we are the first to cover our hearts with our hands. I am a military mother, and I cannot tell you how many times I have gone to an event and people are not holding their hands over their hearts. And this it's respect, and I just was really taken by that. Um, and we have so much in common, of course, because you are part of our country. And I, of course, have to mention your immigration poems and the missing Black girls that were so moving. And I thank you. I thank you for having the courage to do that work and to make us confront it and be responsible for it, in the sense that we all should be working harder on all of these issues that mean so much to us, instead of standing by and expecting someone else to do that work. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox now, but thank you so very much. I was very moved by your work, so thank you so much, Dorsia. Okay, so back to business here. I want to move forward to our next featured reader. So when I asked Charles to send his bio, this is what he sent me. Charles Dodd White is the author of 4 novels, a short story collection, and a memoir. He has received the Appalachian Book of the Year Award and the Chaffin Award for his fiction. He lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, where he teaches English at Fellowship, there we go, State Community College. Okay, well, from his succinct bio, I guess it would be safe to say that Charles is certainly not one to brag, right? And that's very rare in this business. So I went looking for a little bit more information about Charles. And again, there's not a whole lot on his website. He seems to be very content with just the basics. But when I did go looking, I found that many, many others don't mind bragging about Charles at all. And one such person is a writer that we all here in Appalachia look up to and admire, Silas House. And he is the author of many, many books, including Southernmost. And he had this to say about Charles. Both action-packed and introspective, How Fire Runs, which is one of Charles's books, is a timely literary thriller that is hard to put down. Charles Dodd White continues to prove himself as one of the best prose stylists of Appalachian literature in a novel that transcends region to become raw commentary on this volatile moment in America. And Charles himself wrote, "I've always preferred the idea of writing about what bothers me or bothers us. That's what I tried to do with this novel. It's a terrible truth that some of the most beautiful parts of the country are still struggling to wake up from the nightmare of violent racism." And aren't we just having the most incredible, enlightening night with both of these incredible writers? And so you can find in the House of Wilderness and How Fire Runs at the Ohio University Press, A Year Without Months at West Virginia University Press, Lambs of Men and A Shelter of Others at Shotgun Honey. It is my great honor to welcome Charles Dodd White.
Thank you, Kari, for that very kind introduction. And thank you, Haley, as well, for hosting us, and Dorsia for those powerful poems. Excuse me. I always kind of feel a little bit performance anxiety coming after a poet, because poets, I think, have it really nice. So they've got this great rhythm that they can establish when reading their powerful words and then talking a little bit about it, moving on. And while us poor prose writers just kind of muddle along and talk a little bit about what our work is and what we were thinking about, and then read a bit from it. So I will here in a bit read from this book, A Year Without Months, which is the nonfiction book that Kari was talking about. And maybe before I even get started with that, talk a little bit about the ways that it varied from my prior work and what I was kind of struggling with at the time. And you'll probably see from the content as well how it was particularly challenging. So, um, as Kari pointed out, I'm primarily known, I guess, as a fiction writer. And so you get used to certain expectations and tricks. One of the things with fiction writing that you always are thinking about is, of course, how to keep that reader turning the page. And so you're typically thinking about it. You often, I know many of you probably have spent time in writing workshops at some point or another. And so we are used to hearing that word of craft. And fiction writers especially talk a lot about craft, which really for me just boils down to that question of how to keep people involved with the words on the page. And so you get used to certain techniques and certain tricks, for lack of a better word. But I decided after writing a number of novels that I wanted to spend time for writing that was a little bit more directed to my own fulfillment. And to me, actually the literary essay is such a fascinating form. The ability to kind of be wrapped up into another person's consciousness for a extended period of time is such an unusual experience to have today, since we're so used to a fragmentary experience of each other, particularly online, but even in our day-to-day lives. The opportunity to sit down with a book and really kind of enter someone else's perspective and kind of be forgiving of them to an extent, and that you're willing to hear the person out. I think that that really makes the essay a particularly attractive form now. So I did want to do that with this book, but at the same time, it's often called a fragmented memoir. I think there's a lot of tension when you get into nonfiction writing to write a memoir, because people, I think, for better or for worse, they tend to associate that with being the nonfiction equivalent of the novel. And people like that idea of things being of a piece. I think if you talk about an essay collection, they think of short story collections. And I know it's true for me and for a lot of people that one of the criticisms of short story collections is that they're uneven. And I think that sometimes people go into essay collections with a kind of a similar experience. But this one, I wanted to write a book about grief. It is largely about the death of my son in 2015. But I didn't want it to be a grief memoir per se. I didn't want it to be an episode after episode of hand-wringing. And rather, I wanted it to be an opportunity to explore the different ways that I thought about my life and the way I made sense of my life at different points in time. And so the book was, in many ways, I guess you would say, written over a longer period of time than anything else. I think the first essay that's reproduced here was published in 2011. And then the last essay was maybe in 2018. And then there were 3 or 4 that are actually maybe more than that, actually 5 or 6 that were written just for this book. So it's interesting to look at it in terms of making sense of one's life, but also making sense of the life longitudinally, like to try to understand how you change through time and how your own perspectives and what you hold as important changes as well. So what I want to do, kind of give you a little bit of a feel for the book. I'm going to read the preface, which is just a couple of pages long, and then take a break from that and then read a section from one of the later essays with a little bit of connection between the two. So this first section is just the preface. And it seemed to be a good place to start since today's the first day of spring and it talks about the change of seasons. It interests me how much we forget the way the change of seasons can affect us. The cooling of late autumn wakes up the world, makes it so particular and needed. Perception sharpens, as does the desire to move. I become more contained within my body, more alertly animal. I can detect details of a larger nature. People dismiss conversations about weather as mere ritual, a way to fill blank space. But I also think the question of weather can be something more. When we talk about the weather with someone, we let the person know that we care about how they are faring, how well they're enduring what we all have to. So I write this in the turn toward the colder season, and I sit in a stone house nearly 80 years old. I like that our home is made of rock, built by a different scale of time. The rooms are quiet, except for the soft circulations of our pets. When our son died, we tried to fill the place with their life. When you lose a child, time shuffles. It rejects coherence. You are left in a shock wave of permanently changed circumstances. You can immediately glimpse a kind of limitless horizon of grief, a landscape that stretches in all directions, reaching back as well as forward, so that the memories, even the dearest of them, are compromised by pain. The parents of dead children reach for many metaphors to express the depth of their hurt, but so many efforts to convey the experience fail because the loss is more complicated than a matter of intensity. The real disquiet that enters the mind of a stricken parent is the intimacy of the death. The event amputates, and the absence that remains takes up space in a way nothing else can. You feel how physically weak emotion can render you, how you can be fundamentally reduced. Ethan took his own life at 18 in October 2015, a day shy of Halloween. It wasn't a holiday that held any particular significance for me. My mind had been preoccupied that week by a medical concern with my wife, April, which later turned out to be something of no consequence. But at the time, it burdened. When we got the all clear from the doctor, we drove home and opened a bottle of champagne. We drank, enjoyed our first fire of the season, and thought we had evaded something threatening and final. Burning wood became my private ritual through the several weeks following his death. Sometimes in the company of some friend who had come to express condolences, but often just me, drunk on the flames as much as whatever liquor I had at hand. I watched the fire like it was a movie of something I was on the verge of understanding. In time, the fire pried out several memories of not only Ethan, but also the other men in my family I'd lost in the same way, subtracted from this life by their own hands. An absurd trigonometry, I realized. 3 men, the 3 closest in blood, my father, my uncle, and my son, all dead by suicide. I marvel at the sheer statistical improbability of that. What could it be? 1 in a million? A trillion? Still, somehow I have no desire to follow them. The riddle of that is as insoluble as anything I can imagine. This question has always been foremost in my mind. Because of that, these essays are collected from over the past decade, though most have been written as a piece since Ethan's death. I wanted to show a larger family story, how we struggled with and succumbed to the elements that reach out and try to grab hold of the living. I hope their lives will find a place in your memory so that who they were can be larger than my singular recollection. I hope too that what's written here may show you my surviving them was to a good purpose. So that opening is a way of setting the framework for the book, moving through that largely is developed chronologically from my own childhood growing up. A lot of the themes, or one of the most persistent themes, aside this kind of family dysfunction and family violence, mental illness, is nature and the importance of nature consistently throughout all of these experiences. So the essay section I'm going to read to you from, it's kind of inspired by a type of essay that I always admire in nature writers particularly. And that's, you think that you're reading simply a piece about nature, but then there's this nice moment where the writer drifts into a literary comparison or kind of a literary exegesis, explication of something that seems relevant. So I think of my friend Eric Reese, who's a Kentucky writer, who does this so well in so many of his works, but also the writer John McPhee. But even further back, this is, I think, a long tradition. When I read Emerson and Thoreau and all those transcendentalist folks, and this idea that you can really, by looking out, you learn to look in, with a greater intensity. I teach at a community college, and so one of the things that I always try to talk to my students about when they write is that writing, how much of it is a discovery process, that it's not necessarily what you think that you're going to say is the most important thing, but what you learn that you're saying along the way that really kind of makes the entire enterprise rewarding to you personally, but also it's where you really find that connection with the reader, whether that reader be a large readership or a very intimate one. It really doesn't matter. So this essay is called "Learning a Place by Its Waters," and it's kind of roughly about just moving to a new town, and the shadow of Ethan's death is certainly part of it, but this is largely about me and my stepson Ian, since we're a blended family, which adds another complication to the way that we had to process everything we were going through at the time. And it's about canoeing, but it's not canoeing that you would do on a sylvan setting, but rather canoeing through parts of Knoxville. So, learning a place by its waters. We put in on the Holston River beneath a bridge on Asheville Highway. It's Sunday morning and still warm despite late October. The boat, an Old Town Saranac canoe, has only touched the water once before. That was yesterday with my wife. On that outing, fish ripped the surface like it accused them of grievous acts. Today is my stepson Ian's turn, and there is a calmer air. I see only the occasional ring of some soft aquatic muzzle. As we wade out and the canoe settles into the river, a tractor trailer rolls across the bridge overhead, bucks the substructure so that it sounds like the whole span could come down on our heads. It's an odd start to the placid day on the water I had planned. Knoxville is still growing its way around us, though it's been more than 4 years since we moved here. This place, it seems, is a slow vine. Still, the balance of the water is familiar. Even before the first paddle stroke, there is that tug and give that means that the boat is fitted to its natural state. I know it well and welcome the change. But Ian is nervy in that young teenage way. He's always had dizzy energy, and in the boat that anxiety is as obvious as a handshake. We rock too much for such a broad-beamed canoe, but when I tell him to settle, he does. And before long, we are slotted to the waterway. We simply glide. Like so many Americans, my wife and I moved for work. That's what Knoxville was for us after living in Western North Carolina for so many years. A move of necessity. It's hard, though not uncommon, to shift homes when you're on the verge of middle age. Hard, too, if you're an adolescent. But the effort was collective, and we settled into an old stone cottage to make something familiar out of what seemed strange at the outset. I think it helps a great deal that there's a river within easy driving distance of our front door. I like the idea of being able to step off into something that is in perpetual circulation. Ian's adjustment to this place has been by degrees. He was raised in Asheville, where liberal politics and a more generally permissive culture are largely a matter of course. Knoxville intimidating him at first, I believe. It's a conservative town, and the kids don't preen under the undivided attention of income-secure parents. They're made with thicker armor. But he's learned to hammer it out his own version. After Ethan's death, he had to plug himself into a new role, as we all did. He'd shed some of his nerves, while he sometimes needs to be reminded to slow down and take things in. The river has proven the ideal place for that. It's a way for us to let time and memory carry us and think about what things were like once and what they are now. Moving water has a distinct hold over my imagination. When I grew up hunting and fishing in the middle Georgia woods, still or stately water was the rule. Brown and slow, often small ponds that held pan and catfish. If there were rivers, they had gone a deep ochre from rubbing up against deep clay banks. If a river was a metaphor for the passage of time, then a Middle Georgia river was a vehicle for the past perpetually revisited. But my experience as an adult on Appalachian streams was something entirely different. In the mountains, water didn't merely flow, it coursed. When you happened to be on a boat headed downstream, it introduced a set of urgent controversies that needed to be solved quickly. The high country rivers speak a different idiom. They make you pay attention. Shadows cross over us as we come under the boughs that sport incendiary color. But the wooded surroundings soon give way to river-facing lots. Ranch homes built in on obscure seeming roads become increasingly regular, dispelling any sense of wilderness. Small docks with bass boats are continuous along this stretch, though we are still early enough in the day to avoid their disturbance. Once we get to the confluence, that luxury will likely be forfeited, all deep channel and horsepower. But now we pass through a serene suburb, the homes growing larger as we cross the line into the Holston Hills district. The big 3-story homes stare across the clubhouse fairway while a small figure tries to chip his way out of a bunker. One of my favorite passages of writing about rivers is in Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi. In it, he talks about how learning to navigate the Mississippi as a steamboat pilot prepared him for many of the great challenges he would later face in life. The colors and shapes of currents became a kind of semiology that he would later translate into his own work as a writer. Like Twain, I believe in the advantages of reading the natural world like it's a book. We give away a lot when we fail to consider the fact that a great many things in the woods and on the water don't readily cede to our first impression of them. And I can think of no better way to read a place than from the standpoint of its waterways. And I think I have time just for another little short section from another essay here that follows pretty directly after this. And this also features Ian as a character in it. But it's about a backpacking trip that I did with my friend, the writer Mark Powell, and his son Silas. Some of you may know his work. Most recently, he had a novel called The Late Rebellion, but he has had other well-known books as well. But we took this to there's a Roan Mountain is about 2 hours from my house, a little bit less than that, I suppose, but it's a fairly rigorous hike if you do a certain stretch of the Appalachian Trail. And we went on a particularly bad weather time, and I made the mistake of packing too much material since I hadn't done a forced march since I was in the military, and I wasn't as strong as I remembered myself to be. So this essay is called Underweight. It was my first backpacking trip in years, and we were up on Roan Mountain in late September. My friend Mark and his son Silas were meeting my stepson Ian and me at the hostel where it was all supposed to end. We arrived early for the shuttle that would take us up to the top, so we stood around in the seasonably warm sun, catching up and hefting one another's pack to get an idea of what we were toting. Silas was still just 11, so his backpack was not much different than you'd expect to see. Tidy, trim, and light. I'd slapped together an ad hoc rig for Ian, a big pack that my wife had used when she skied out west, fitted with a bulky Coleman sleeping bag and an old military surplus sleeping pad tied to the outside. Mark and I both carried old external frame backpacks, which were still fashionable 20 years earlier, but once you looked around and saw the slick ultralight gear that the other trail bums at the hostel were wearing, I started to suspect we looked a lot like what we were, two middle-aged amateurs about to get our asses handed to them. The recognition provoked a sick feeling in my stomach. When I packed the night before, I'd been thinking of what it meant to be on a forced march in the Marine Corps. There, A heavy pack was a right and responsibility. You weighted the pack for the sake of conditioning, a prescribed burden that had nothing to do with practicality. Instead, you wanted the strain and the suffering. And that was before the helmet, flak jacket, and rifle were added to the mix. That was what a Marine was, after all, a vessel for hardship. But that version of me was a long time gone. As soon as I turned the pack up and let it fall on my shoulders, I knew the weight I was carrying was twice what I could bear. I thought to see if there was anything I might quickly subtract and take back to the car, but before I could, the shuttle showed up. We rode up to Carver's Gap in the back of a limousine because it was only the four of us going that time of day, and the driver didn't want to bother pulling the bus around. He was gruff-mannered and would later get his name in a national outdoor publication for refusing to shut down shuttle operations or his hostel during the spring 2020 COVID-19 quarantine. Got his name in the paper, and not in a good way, as my wife would say. He had cranked up some blend of new country crap that advertised patriotism and a penchant for good times at the lake with cheap beer, those qualities being putatively intertwined. Mark and I traded smirks while we rode to the top without saying much. At the trailhead, we thanked him for the ride and shouldered our kits, crossed the road, and stepped onto the path. In his essay, Walking, Thoreau talks about the intuitive relationship between walking and thinking. Of course, he preferred to strike out on an independent course, avoiding anything as pedestrian or as a determined trail. He would likely have doubted the quality of any thinking that might occur on a world-famous trail trod by untold millions across the years. But even if we follow a physical rut, I disagree that we must by force follow a mental one. Our experiences, by their very nature, diverge daily in both small and large ways. I had become sharply aware of this in the 4 years since my son Ethan died. In a way, I needed a posted trail to follow, a way to find a course of footsteps I should have followed as a younger man. Thanks.
Charles, thank you so much for that. Gosh, I admire your courage and being able to share these beautiful essays. There are others among us who have experienced suicide in our families, and I really appreciate you putting this work out there so that those of us who need to hear it can hear it and find it. So much that you shared was just so amazingly wonderful. The landscape of grief, we reach for metaphors. The question of weather, what are we enduring? It's not even about the weather. It's what we're enduring, and that small talk helps us. And I could say so much more, but I don't want to get emotional. But what I would like to do is invite DORSÍA to turn her mic on and her video back on. And then I thought tonight I'm going to ask the question because we don't like to run too long. And I'm sorry to not allow our audience. We'll just see how long you all take in answering this question. And I just came up with it because I think this is what people would be very interested in hearing from both of you, because from my perspective, you both tonight were writing about healing. So then I have to ask the question, is writing healing? So maybe start with you, Charles, and then maybe DORSÍA, you could chime in, or we can do the opposite, however you wish. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on how getting thoughts out on a piece of paper can help us heal, and therefore also help others to heal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the difficult things about grief and loss, just generally speaking, and it doesn't even have to be that big. I mean, we're obviously wounded in things that aren't as extreme as that. But I think that there's a tendency to believe that it's happening to you alone, and that it drives you to a place of isolation. And it's really easy to get caught up in that. It's easy to get caught up in loneliness. And I think that it's something that I certainly when I think about all of the kind of dumb things I've done in my life, it's from loneliness. And that's, you can carry loneliness with you regardless of, you can have people around you that love you all the time. Um, but for me, that experience of loneliness is something that's almost it's like cause and effect. Like you can't help but feel it because everything feels so specific. Suffering is a very specific thing. So for me, writing is, even if it's not immediately the case, it's leading back toward community. It's leading back toward, and even if that's not a community that you realize in a physical sense, but even if it's reaching out to try to express something and so someone else will feel the truth of what you've done. Um, I I'm really, one of the big influences on my thinking about this is the Roman writer Seneca and his letters to Lucilius, and the ways in which the entire conceit of the book is writing to a friend about trying to share with a friend how he's made his own life bearable, essentially. And so for me, healing is a natural. I mean, it's the end goal. The writing is the process to get there, right? That it's the way you get. It's the medicine you take, I guess.
I agree that writing can be very healing. In my particular experience with Hurricane Maria, I was writing my thoughts in a journal. And I had, the old-fashioned spiral notebooks, and I was writing my thoughts there. And it was because I didn't want to alarm my husband, other family members, my son, with what was going on around me because it was so chaotic. And I was so nervous and worried, like, when is the power going to come back on? We also lost our water, standing in line for food. And I thought, oh my goodness, all these thoughts were going through my head. So it was the only way really I could process everything was to put it on paper. That made sense to me. I didn't know at the time it was going to turn into a book, but when I went back and looked at the journals that I had, I thought, oh my goodness, these are poems. This is a book. Oh my goodness. And I think one way to think about writing can be the form of keeping writing as a journal. I encourage those that like that format. I have the name here. It's called the Journal of Expressive Writing. They talk about the power of journaling, and they also publish. They also have a web series. If you're not familiar with it, I'll try to put that in the chat before we leave. And they talk about the power of journaling, that it can be a pathway to healing. Now, I'm not going to say, though, that it's a cure for all, because some people may need other moments, other avenues to heal. You may need therapy, you may need medication, you may need, some time with your family, you may need the mind, body, spirit connection. There's so many different things that you may need. However, writing for many people can be a powerful pathway to get you to think about the power within your own self. And that's what writing has done for me. When you feel, oh my goodness, this is all going on around me, and there are so many things outside of our control, what can I control? My thoughts on paper. And I tell that to my students all the time, even if it doesn't make sense to you, just put it on paper. It's okay. Doesn't have to be published. You can just keep it private. It's okay, but just get it out. And it's a safe space to get those feelings out. And if you want to publish it, great. If not, you can just keep it. You can keep it there. You can keep it in a journal.
I just realized I was muted, so I'll say that again. I agree with both of you. I do. And Dorothy, I work with folks who are incarcerated here in Ohio, 18 different prisons. And that's one of the first things I suggest is, could they be allowed to have a notebook or at least a good stack of paper so that they can begin journaling? And from there, and of course, we do a lot of list making, and we talk a lot about how that idea of bringing chaos to things once you get it out on a piece of paper. So I couldn't agree more, and really appreciate both of you. And one thing I forgot to mention, Charles, is your voice is so hypnotizing. I mean, I could literally listen to you read for hours, I think.
That's good to hear, because I'm going to try to start a podcast this summer. So we'll.
Oh, that will be
That's
that'll be
wonderful.
fantastic. And I really appreciate you being able to share your work. Both of you have gone through very traumatic experiences, and it's difficult. But again, I thank you both, because so many people need to find others, and we don't necessarily want to go out and meet people and beat the bushes, but it's so wonderful when you can find a novelist and or a poet who it feels like, you know, they are writing to you. And I think both of you absolutely qualify for that. So we're getting near our usual stopping time. I usually share a poem, and I was going to do that if the two of you do not mind. And I thought doing this poem, because I thought, I don't want to do this poem, I want to do something else. But this poem kept coming up, and now I know why. So I'm just going to share it. It's very short, and it's called Vernal Equinox. I've been thinking about last times I never knew were the last. Grandma cooing me unconscious, Daddy whistling me home to supper. My toddler's toothless grin, tiny fingers clenching wildflowers. The last time I prayed, desperate for those departed, how they flit ahead of us flying. Tonight the Big Dipper balances on its handle. Tepid tree frogs peep songs of resurrection. One morning soon I'll eat a good breakfast, fill a water bottle, pack a book, walk the fence row into the holler, rest beneath the eagle's favored perch, shake off this inexplicable sadness, 2 cinder blocks where lungs ought to be. Let spring hold on to me for a while. So I really hope everybody will do that. I hope you'll let this spring hold on to you for a while, bring you some comfort. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I do want to just take 1 minute. Charles or Dorsia, did you have a question for one another? I did promise you we would take a minute to do that if you'd care to.
Can I go?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I love writing about nature. Do you spend time in the natural world, and what do you get out of it, I suppose, would be the kind of the dual question.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Whenever I can, I go outside. I encourage my students to go outside. They had this presentation, and part of their presentation, it was really fun. They had us with a scavenger hunt. So they said, Professor, wear your walking shoes because we hid things across campus and you have to find them. And of course, it linked to the novel that we were reading, but I loved it because I always tell students, you know, there are certain students that they really need to be outside after a while. You need the natural light. You need to get outside of the classroom. And then their energy level magically picks back up. And I tell them, especially being in the Caribbean, we're surrounded by all this lush green. Get outside, get in tune with nature. And some of my students, oh, it's so hot. Oh, we're sweaty. You know, oh, that particular day, no one complained because they were all so happy we're outside. And the class period went just like this. And I told them, get outside, you know, because when you're walking, of course, there's the science behind it, of course, the endorphins. But when you get outside, it really is nature's way of reminding us where we are from and that we are kin to that tree and those birds. You know, we're all in this together. And so that's what I'm hoping students will understand too, that when you're thinking about recycling, it's not just like, oh, I'm just going to put that over there. How can we help Earth? Earth then will help us back. And there really is something, I use a lot of color in my poems, but especially the color green. And I tell my students, think about the green space. Think about what you're breathing in. You know, because we're so fortunate here in the Caribbean that we're surrounded by it. So think about that, and that normally, without sounding very granola-esque, that normally gets them thinking about interacting with nature in a different way. So I try to go for my walk. I have it on my phone, my 3 miles every day. And I'm always telling my son, let's go, let's get outside. Because it does alleviate a lot of tension that you feel in the body sometimes. When you're surrounded and you hear the birds, you feel the wind, you see all these beautiful trees, the flowers, So I always tell students too, go outside. You're having a bad day, just go for a nice walk. See if it just calms you to a place where you feel centered, and then start from there. And I think, part of what I write definitely goes into looking at the natural world with poetry and how all that is connected.
Yeah, I mean, it comes through in what you were reading for sure.
Thank you. May I ask you the same question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it's those it's those inners and outer landscapes for me, right? The way in which it's the mirror. The further you look into the natural world, the more that you learn about yourself. I just read a book that had I thought, a really elegant and pithy way of talking, kind of like what you were saying too, and everybody that spends time in nature. It's Callan Wink is a Western writer, and he's got this new book called Beartooth. And there's a scene where he talks about nature is a twice told tale. And then he goes on and talks about, how the branches in your veins are like the branches on a leaf, and, are the branches in a root system. And I thought it was just such an elegant, clear way of this idea that but it's also a tale. It's a story that nature is telling itself all the time around us. So it's a source of endless fascination. And in my fiction, it's obviously probably the driving theme and the destruction of it, but also the nature both. I'm interested in how our social fabrics reflect, if when we treat nature poorly, we treat each other poorly. Those are obviously inextricable. There's it's called Deep. I can't remember. There's a study about this, but Wendell Berry writes about it so well with this idea, and it's something that's certainly, if there's an overriding ethic in my work, I think it's that.
I completely agree with that. And I always come back to Naomi Klein when she's talking always about disaster capitalism. It's like you have so many people, besides with the Palisades happening right now, where people are desperate to move and they're selling their homes. And then you have these people that are, buying just, bare lots, and they're saying we'll clear away the devastation, but it's a fraction of the price of what these people paid for their homes.
Mhm.
And they're taking advantage. So the vulnerable, again, are the ones that suffer so much. And unfortunately, sometimes people are still waiting for aid from FEMA. They have these GoFundMes to get basic resources. So we think, why aren't we helping people more? These are people that have lost so much. Why are we making them, go through all these hoops to get basic resources? It really is shameful in so many ways. So I agree with you. The way that we treat nature sometimes, the way we treat each other, just shows such a lack of compassion. And it really shouldn't be this way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, there's this tendency to blame the marginalized or the poor for their circumstances too,
Right.
um, you see that playing out politically in large scale currently, and it seems like, at least in American politics, like no matter what, half the country thinks that, no matter what,
Right.
and so I mean, it really is a conflict or a dialectic or whatever you want to call it that is just it's locked. It seems to be locked, and it's disheartening, but I mean it's it's the truth of what we're dealing with.
So true. Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you both so much. What an amazing evening we have had. I really can't thank you enough. It was just wonderful. And I want to thank everybody who came this evening. And then I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone who will be watching us at a later date, either on social media or on the Sheila-Na-Gig YouTube page. I also want to thank the Ohio Arts Council because they sponsor Spoken and Heard, and we wouldn't be able to do this without them. So I'm very, very grateful to them. Please buy our guest books. You can find them on my website at KariGunter-Seymour-Poet.com. And join us next month to hear the extraordinary Joan Quan Glass and Monique Dutan. I have been tongue-tied all night, so I do apologize, Monique. I do know your name. So we'll be here next week, the third Thursday. It's always the third Thursday of every month. And until then, friends, until we meet again, good night.